Chapter 1, The Clash. The tension in the GMM Group's conference room was almost palpable. Employees from both the legal and HR departments sat around the long, polished table, whispering amongst themselves. It wasn't every day that you got to witness a verbal duel between two of the company's most well-respected, yet ideologically opposed, department heads. At one end of the table sat Ryder Hale, GMM's head of legal, his sharp gaze scanning the documents in front of him. He adjusted his cufflinks, his movements precise, controlled, like a man who had never lost an argument in his life. At the other end, Sebastian Cole, HR manager, leaned back slightly in his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, ready to counter any attack with the practiced ease of someone who had diffused more corporate crises than he could count. The source of today's conflict? A labor dispute involving a junior employee's contract clause, one writer insisted was airtight, while Sebastian argued for a more empathetic approach. I fail to see the issue here, Ryder began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. The contract explicitly states that early termination of employment requires a 1-month notice. The employee breached that agreement. The company has the right to enforce penalties. Sebastian sighed, shaking his head. Ryder, we're talking about a junior employee who was forced to resign due to unforeseen personal circumstances. Penalizing them for that not only damages morale but sets a terrible precedent. Ryder raised an eyebrow. A precedent? You mean one where employees believe they can break legally binding agreements without consequence? Sebastian leaned forward. I mean one where the company demonstrates basic human decency instead of reducing every situation to a contractual loophole. A murmur rippled through the room. It was an unspoken rule in GMM that Ryder and Sebastian's debates were prime entertainment. Some employees exchanged knowing glances, while others discreetly checked their phones, probably to see if the betting pool on today's winner was still open. Near the back of the room, Caleb, the CEO's assistant, sat with his arms crossed, watching the spectacle unfold with mild amusement. Next to him, Elias, the feisty administrative supervisor, smirked as he nudged Caleb's side. I've got $50 on Sebastian making Ryder lose his temper first, Elias whispered. Caleb rolled his eyes. You do realize Ryder has never lost his temper in a meeting, right? Exactly why the odds are so good. Elias grinned. Want in? Not a chance. Caleb shook his head, though he couldn't deny the entertainment value. Meanwhile, Finn, a fresh-faced new hire in the marketing department, had been dragged into the meeting due to a minor HR-related issue. Sitting stiffly near the front, he watched the argument unfold with wide eyes, regretting every life decision that had led him here. As the debate escalated, Ryder finally set down his pen with a deliberate motion. The law is clear. If we start making exceptions, we undermine the very foundation of our contracts. Sebastian didn't flinch. And if we rigidly adhere to rules without considering the human element, we undermine the trust between employer and employee. There has to be a balance. A tense silence settled over the room. For a moment, it seemed neither man would back down. Then, Caleb decided to intervene before the conference room exploded. He cleared his throat. Gentlemen, perhaps we take a short break before HR and legal start drafting lawsuits against each other? A few chuckles rippled through the attendees, breaking some of the tension. Sebastian exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Fine. But I'm not letting this go, Ryder. Ryder smirked slightly. I wouldn't expect you to. As the room began to clear, Elias grinned at Caleb. So, about that bet. Caleb shot him a look. Not happening. Finn, still looking shell-shocked, muttered, I think I need a drink. And with that, the first battle between Ryder Hale and Sebastian Cole came to an inconclusive, yet undeniably entertaining, end. But for those who knew them well, it was clear this was only the beginning. Chapter 2, Forced Partnership. The moment Ryder Hale saw Sebastian Cole waiting at the departure gate, he knew his day had just gotten significantly worse. Tell me this is a mistake. Ryder adjusted the strap of his leather briefcase, his expression carefully neutral but his tone anything but. Sebastian, who had been scrolling through emails on his phone, barely looked up. Good morning to you too, Ryder. And no, this is not a mistake. We're both needed for this case. I handle legal matters. You manage people. Why exactly are you here? Ryder's brow furrowed as he crossed his arms. Because this case involves an employee lawsuit that, if not handled properly, could spiral into a full-fledged PR disaster, Sebastian replied smoothly. Your job is to keep the company from getting sued. Mine is to make sure we don't become the next viral scandal. Ryder exhaled sharply. Wonderful. The boarding announcement interrupted their exchange. Begrudgingly, Ryder followed Sebastian onto the plane, resigning himself to the unpleasant reality that he'd be stuck with the HR manager for the next 48 hours. The first hour passed in tense silence. Ryder buried himself in legal documents while Sebastian skimmed through HR reports. The occasional glance from a flight attendant or fellow passenger made it clear their stiff postures weren't exactly subtle. Eventually, Sebastian broke the silence. You know, for someone who claims to hate unnecessary drama, you certainly bring a lot of tension wherever you go. Ryder didn't look up. It's not drama. It's efficiency. Sebastian chuckled. Efficiency? I'd say it's an impressive level of social avoidance. Ryder shot him a withering look. And I'd say you have an impressive talent for sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Sebastian merely smiled. It's called doing my job. Upon arrival, the two men were whisked into a high-stakes negotiation. A mid-level manager had been terminated under unclear circumstances, and the employee was threatening to sue for wrongful dismissal. The situation was delicate. One wrong move could set a dangerous precedent. Seated across from the opposing counsel, Ryder remained calm and calculated. The employment contract clearly states that termination under these conditions is within the company's rights. Sebastian, sitting beside him, smoothly interjected. And yet, the way this termination was handled could have been more transparent. Our goal isn't just to win the case, but to prevent future incidents. The discussion became a back and forth between legal jargon and human resource diplomacy. While Ryder focused on contract clauses and legal loopholes, Sebastian worked to de-escalate emotions in the room. At one point, when the opposing side's lawyer grew aggressive, Ryder was ready to retaliate in kind, but Sebastian's subtle nudge under the table stopped him. Later, as they stepped out of the meeting room, Ryder muttered, "I had it under control." Sebastian smirked. "You had it under legal control. I had it under making sure no one storms out control." Ryder didn't reply, but for the first time, he grudgingly acknowledged that Sebastian might have a point. By the time they checked into their hotel, exhaustion had set in. Ryder was about to head to his room when the receptionist gave them an apologetic smile. "I'm terribly sorry, gentlemen, but due to an unexpected booking error, we only have one suite available." Ryder's eyes narrowed. "Fix it." The receptionist sighed. "I wish I could, sir, but we are completely booked. There are no other rooms available in the hotel tonight." Sebastian chuckled. "Oh, this just keeps getting better." Ryder pinched the bridge of his nose. "I refuse." "Then I guess you're sleeping in the lobby." Sebastian clapped him on the back before taking the keycard. "Come on, roomie." Ryder stared at him in silent agony. Despite his frustrations, Ryder found himself sitting across from Sebastian in their shared suite later that night, both men hunched over reports. After an hour, Sebastian stretched. "You know, for someone who claims to despise HR, you sure benefit from my expertise a lot." Ryder didn't even look up. "Don't flatter yourself." Sebastian leaned forward. "Admit it, just once you needed me today." Ryder hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he said, "Fine. You were useful. But don't expect me to make a habit of this." Sebastian grinned. "I'll take what I can get." For the first time since the trip began, Ryder didn't feel entirely opposed to the idea of working alongside Sebastian. Not that he'd ever admit it. But Sebastian? He definitely noticed. Chapter 3: Mutual Influence. Ryder Hale had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize. Personal feelings and professional decisions belonged in two separate universes, and he intended to keep it that way. Yet, after multiple instances of working with Sebastian Cole, the rigid barriers he had constructed were showing cracks. Their most recent collaboration had been frustratingly efficient. Ryder had to admit privately, of course, that Sebastian wasn't just a bleeding-heart HR manager who coddled employees. He was pragmatic, with a strong sense of fairness that extended beyond mere sentimentality. And Sebastian, in turn, was beginning to see that Ryder, despite his harsh exterior, wasn't as cold as he pretended to be. This realization brought them to their latest predicament, a mandatory company dinner. The restaurant buzzed with lively conversation as employees from various departments settled into their seats. The event had been organized as a team-building activity, though Ryder had his doubts about how effective it would be. He had intended to leave early, but that plan crumbled the moment Sebastian caught his eye across the table and smirked. "You're actually socializing? Should I be concerned?" Sebastian teased, swirling his drink. "I lost a bet," Ryder deadpanned. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "With who?" Ryder exhaled. "Myself." Seated nearby, Finn and Milo were deep in conversation, but Milo, ever observant, had been watching the interactions between the two department heads with barely concealed amusement. He nudged Finn. "Tell me I'm not the only one noticing this." Finn blinked, looking between Ryder and Sebastian. "Noticing what?" "The thing." "There's a thing?" Finn frowned, confused. Milo rolled his eyes. "Never mind. You're too innocent for this." Meanwhile, at another table, Caleb sipped his whiskey thoughtfully as he observed Ryder. Something was different. Less hostility, more subtle engagement. He made a mental note to test his theory later. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere grew more relaxed, and with it, the competitive spirit in the room intensified. Someone, probably Elias, had proposed a drinking challenge. To no one's surprise, Sebastian had been effortlessly roped in. The real shock came when Ryder, after a long-suffering sigh, downed his first drink without protest. Elias grinned. "Oh, this is gonna be fun." Sebastian turned to Ryder, eyes glinting with mischief. "Didn't peg you as the type to play along." Ryder set his glass down with a measured tap. "I'm full of surprises." "Prove it." Sebastian leaned in, challenging. A few rounds later, things had escalated. Ryder wasn't drunk, not entirely, but he was definitely in a looser state than usual. And Sebastian? His normally composed demeanor had started slipping, replaced by easy laughter and relaxed body language. It was during one of these moments, in between playful jabs and shared amusement, that it happened. Sebastian leaned in slightly, his shoulder brushing against Ryder's as he reached for another drink. The touch was fleeting, but Ryder's breath hitched. He didn't move away. Sebastian noticed. For a moment, there was only the sound of glasses clinking and the hum of conversation around them. Then, as if testing something, Sebastian let his fingers graze Ryder's wrist. Ryder didn't pull back. Elias, ever the opportunist, whistled. Well. Didn't see that coming." Finn, now sufficiently tipsy, blinked at them. "Are they? Is this?" Milo smirked. "Now you see it." By the time Ryder and Sebastian stepped outside for some air, the alcohol buzz had faded enough for reality to sink in. Ryder rubbed his temples, exhaling slowly. "Well, that was something." Sebastian studied him. "Regretting it?" Ryder met his gaze, and for once, there was no sharp retort, no automatic dismissal. "No," he admitted. "Just processing." Sebastian smiled, something softer than his usual teasing smirk. "Take your time, Ryder. I'm not going anywhere." From a distance, Caleb watched them leave together, his suspicion from earlier solidifying. He took another sip of his drink and smirked to himself. Interesting. Chapter 4, The Turning Point. Ryder Hale was not the type to complain. He was not the type to ask for help, to slow down, or to admit that maybe, just maybe, he was pushing himself too hard. But his body had other plans. It started with persistent headaches, then came the sleepless nights. The stress from handling a particularly complex legal dispute had reached a breaking point, but Ryder, ever the perfectionist, refused to delegate. He ignored the warnings, the fatigue, the dizziness until everything went black. The beeping of the heart monitor was the first thing Ryder registered when he woke up. The second was the faint sound of someone flipping through a magazine. His gaze flickered to the side, where Sebastian Cole sat, arms crossed, flipping lazily through a health pamphlet. "You're awake," Sebastian said, not looking up. "That's a relief. I was starting to wonder if I'd have to organize a company-wide morning event." Ryder groaned, rubbing his temples. "How long?" 2 days. Ryder stiffened. "I need to." "You need to stay put," Sebastian cut in, finally meeting his gaze. "You collapsed from exhaustion, Ryder. The doctors say you've been running on fumes for weeks." "I don't have time for this." Ryder tried to sit up, only for Sebastian to press a firm hand against his shoulder, holding him in place with surprising strength. "Make time," Sebastian said quietly, his usual teasing tone absent. "HR is enforcing mandatory medical leave. You're officially off duty." Ryder glared at him. "You can't force me." Sebastian smirked. "Actually, I can. CEO's orders. Also, if you so much as check your emails, I'll personally make sure your hospital meals consist only of flavorless protein shakes." Back at the office, Jasper sat in Ryder's chair, scowling at the mountain of legal documents in front of him. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, shuffling through contracts that he barely had time to review. "How the hell does he do this every day?" "Welcome to the world of our beloved workaholic," Elias said, leaning against the doorframe with a grin. "How's it feel to be acting legal overlord?" Jasper glared. "Like I want to set fire to this entire department." Elias laughed. "You'd miss him if he quit, though." Jasper snorted but didn't argue. Ryder woke up again that evening to find Sebastian still there, scrolling through his phone. "You have a job, you know," Ryder grumbled. "You don't need to babysit me." Sebastian smirked. "You're not that lucky. I already finished my work and had dinner." "What about you?" Ryder hesitated. "Not hungry." Sebastian's eyes softened, and he got up, disappearing for a few minutes before returning with a tray. "Eat something. And don't argue, because I will feed you if necessary." Ryder sighed but took the tray. As he ate, Sebastian studied him thoughtfully. "You're always the one handling everything," Sebastian said. "Have you ever considered that you don't have to?" Ryder didn't answer right away. He finished chewing, setting his fork down carefully. "It's easier that way." Sebastian shook his head. "No, it's not. You just don't trust anyone else to carry the weight." A beat of silence passed. Then, softly, Ryder admitted, "Maybe." Sebastian's lips quirked upward. "Well, guess what? You don't have a choice this time." Ryder exhaled but, for once, didn't argue. Back at the office, Elias watched as Sebastian typed out an update to the executive team regarding Ryder's condition. "You've got it bad," Elias remarked casually. Sebastian didn't even glance up. "Excuse me?" "Oh, come on. You've been practically glued to Ryder's bedside. If I didn't know better, I'd say you're already picking out wedding venues." Sebastian rolled his eyes but didn't deny it. Elias grinned. "See? You're not even protesting." Sebastian sighed, rubbing his temples. "He makes everything so damn difficult." Elias smirked. "And yet, you're still there." Sebastian didn't have an answer for that. Chapter 5, Holding On. Ryder had never been good at slowing down. Forced rest had given him plenty of time to think, especially with Sebastian showing up almost every day under the flimsy excuse of just checking in. "You do realize I'm not on my deathbed, right?" Ryder muttered as Sebastian set a fresh cup of coffee on his bedside table. "I'd believe that if you actually looked like you rested," Sebastian shot back, pulling up a chair. "Besides, someone has to make sure you don't sneak in work." Ryder scoffed. "I'm not a child." Sebastian smirked. You're worse. At least children take naps when they're told. Ryder rolled his eyes but took a sip of the coffee anyway. And just like that, Sebastian settled in, flipping through his phone as if this were routine. Maybe, Ryder realized, it was. By the time Ryder was back at work, the first major event on his schedule was a company-wide retreat. This is a terrible idea, Ryder grumbled as he and Sebastian stood near the registration table, watching employees gather. Which part? Sebastian asked. The bonding exercises, the group activities, or the fact that you're stuck here with me? All of the above. Unbeknownst to them, Milo and Rowan, who had planned the event, had paired them as partners for the day's main challenge, a strategic problem-solving exercise. Oh, Rowan muttered, nudging Milo. Did we just sign up for live-action fireworks? Milo smirked. Or a rom-com. The challenge involved solving a series of logistical puzzles under time constraints. It was exactly the kind of task Ryder excelled at: structured, logical, no unnecessary distractions. Unfortunately for him, so did Sebastian, just with a completely different approach. I'm telling you, we need to prioritize the workflow efficiency, Ryder argued. And I'm telling you, if you don't consider the people in the workflow, efficiency means nothing, Sebastian shot back. Employees from other teams had stopped pretending not to watch. At this point, it was practically an office sport, Ryder versus Sebastian, round 57. But what no one expected was how seamlessly they actually worked together. Their methods clashed, sure, but somehow, instead of imploding, they balanced each other out. By the time they completed the task first, no less Finn, who had been casually observing, leaned over to Asher. Is it just me, or do they actually work well together? Asher sipped his drink, smirking. It's not just you. That evening, after the event wrapped up, Ryder found himself outside, standing next to Sebastian. The air was crisp, carrying the distant murmur of employees still mingling. For once, Sebastian was quiet. Ryder, usually fine with silence, found himself oddly restless. You've been around a lot, Ryder said finally, voice gruff. Sebastian tilted his head. That a complaint? Ryder hesitated. No. Sebastian studied him, waiting. Ryder wasn't good at this, talking, not like Sebastian. But he had spent too much time avoiding what had been obvious for a while now. I used to think you were just an HR idealist, Ryder admitted, glancing at him. All talk, no real weight. Sebastian chuckled. And now? Now I know you're a pain in the ass who somehow always has a point. Ryder exhaled, then, softer, and I can't ignore it anymore. Sebastian's expression shifted, something warm and knowing in his gaze. I was wondering when you'd catch up. Ryder huffed. You're insufferable. Sebastian smiled, stepping just a little closer. And yet, here you are. Neither of them moved away. The next morning at the office, Finn watched as Ryder and Sebastian passed by, something different about them. Less bickering, more ease. He turned to Asher. Do you think? Asher smirked. Oh, definitely. And with that, a new story was just beginning.